I never believed a stranger could change my life just by moving a few feet away, until the man behind the next door became the person I looked forward to seeing every morning. Ethan Parker had always liked quiet. His small apartment on Maplewood Avenue was the perfect place for someone who spent most of his days drawing illustrations at a cluttered desk near the window. The neighborhood was calm, the coffee shop downstairs knew his order, and the old building had become a place where he could disappear whenever the world felt too loud. That was exactly how Ethan liked it. Predictable. Safe. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. A moving truck pulled up in front of the building, blocking half the parking lot. Ethan watched from his window as boxes were carried upstairs to the apartment next to his, the one that had been empty for almost 6 months. He told himself he was only curious. That was all. But when the new neighbor appeared in the hallway, Ethan forgot the excuse he had prepared in his head. The man was tall, with dark hair slightly messy from the rain, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made the entire hallway feel different. "Hi, I'm Noah Bennett," he said, offering a small smile. "I guess we're neighbors now." Ethan looked down at the paint stain on his old hoodie and suddenly felt like he had forgotten how normal conversations worked. "Ethan, yeah, neighbor, that's me." He immediately regretted how awkward he sounded. Noah didn't laugh. He just smiled like he found it strangely charming. "Nice to meet you, Ethan." It should have been a simple introduction. A few seconds between two people who lived next door. But for some reason, Ethan remembered the sound of Noah's voice long after he closed his apartment door. Over the next few days, small moments started happening. Ethan found a package that belonged to Noah and left it outside his door. Noah returned the favor when one of Ethan's art supplies was accidentally delivered to his apartment. They started exchanging quick greetings in the hallway. A few words became a few minutes. A few minutes became conversations. Ethan learned that Noah was an architect who had recently moved across the country for a fresh start. Noah learned that Ethan created character designs and spent too much time drinking coffee when he was working. "You know," Noah said one evening as they stood outside their apartments, "I've lived in a lot of places, but I've never had a neighbor who remembers my coffee order after only a week." Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe I'm just observant." But the truth was different. Ethan was starting to notice everything about Noah. The way he smiled when he talked about buildings he designed. The way he always held the elevator door open. The way his usually serious expression softened whenever they spoke. And that scared Ethan a little. Because Noah Bennett was supposed to be just the person living next door. But somehow, the space between their two apartments was starting to feel smaller every day. The days that followed felt strangely different to Ethan. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no grand moments. No sudden changes that anyone else would notice. But somehow, the quiet parts of his life started carrying a little more warmth. It began with simple things. A knock on the door when Noah had received Ethan's package by mistake. A quick conversation while waiting for the elevator. A friendly wave across the hallway in the morning. Small moments that should have disappeared as quickly as they came, but somehow stayed with Ethan throughout the day. One Friday evening, Ethan returned home carrying a paper bag filled with takeout from his favorite little restaurant down the street. As he reached his apartment door, he noticed Noah standing outside his own place, looking at a small collection of boxes with a thoughtful expression. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. Noah looked over and smiled. "Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where everything goes." Apparently, moving into a new apartment means discovering you own way too many things. Ethan laughed. "That sounds like a personal problem." Noah looked amused. "You are surprisingly funny for someone who always looks like he is one coffee away from falling asleep." Ethan placed a hand over his chest in fake offense. "I cannot believe you have been judging my coffee addiction this whole time." "I have been observing," Noah replied. "There is a difference." That answer made Ethan smile. Noah had a way of saying things that sounded serious, but somehow felt playful. It was becoming one of the things Ethan liked most about him. A few minutes later, Noah noticed the takeout bag in Ethan's hand. "Dinner?" he asked. "Unfortunately, yes. My cooking skills are limited to making toast without causing a disaster." Noah laughed quietly. "I find that hard to believe." "Why?" Ethan asked. "Because you seem like someone who can create entire worlds with a pencil. I think making dinner is probably easier than that." For a moment, Ethan did not know what to say. Compliments usually made him uncomfortable. He never knew where to put his hands or how to respond without making things awkward. But coming from Noah, it felt different. It felt genuine. That night, they ended up eating together in the hallway because Noah had not unpacked his kitchen supplies yet. They sat on the floor outside their apartments, sharing stories about their lives. Ethan talked about growing up drawing characters in the margins of his school notebooks. Noah talked about how he always wanted to design buildings that made people feel at home. "That is probably why I like my job," Noah said. "Everyone thinks architecture is just about walls and windows. But it is really about creating a place where someone feels like they belong." Ethan looked at him carefully. There was something about those words that stayed with him, because maybe Noah understood that feeling better than anyone. Both of them had been searching for a place where they belonged. And somehow, in the middle of an ordinary apartment hallway, they had started finding it. Later that night, Ethan stood inside his apartment, looking at the wall they shared. It was strange to think that only a short time ago, that wall separated him from a complete stranger. Now, behind it was someone whose footsteps he recognized, whose voice could make a normal day feel lighter, and whose presence was slowly becoming part of his routine. Ethan shook his head and laughed quietly at himself. "It is just friendship," he whispered. But deep down, he already knew that was not the whole truth. The quiet routine Ethan had built around his life slowly began to change in ways he never expected. It was not because of some huge event or a dramatic moment. It was because of all the little things that started making ordinary days feel different. Noah became part of the rhythm of his life. A familiar voice in the hallway, a friendly smile near the mailbox, a person who somehow made the apartment building feel less like a place to sleep and more like a place to come home to. One Saturday morning, Ethan stepped outside with a basket of laundry and nearly walked into Noah, who was carrying a small toolbox. "Morning," Noah said with a smile. "You are starting to make me think this hallway is our unofficial meeting place." Ethan looked at the toolbox. "Are you fixing something?" "The cabinet in my kitchen keeps making a strange noise. I am hoping it is just a loose hinge and not the apartment trying to communicate with me." Ethan laughed. "If your apartment starts talking, I am moving out before you." Noah smiled, and Ethan noticed something he had never seen before. Noah looked completely relaxed. There was no serious expression, no careful distance. Just a simple moment where he seemed happy. "Do you always joke this much?" Noah asked. Ethan shrugged. "Only when I am nervous." The words came out before he could stop them. For a second, Ethan wished he could reach into the air and pull them back. But Noah did not make it awkward. He simply tilted his head and said, "Interesting. I would have guessed you were always like this." That answer stayed in Ethan's mind longer than it should have. Later that afternoon, Ethan was working at his desk when he heard a soft knock on his door. When he opened it, Noah was standing there holding 2 cups of coffee. "I made too much," Noah said. Ethan looked at the 2 cups and raised an eyebrow. "You made exactly 2 cups?" Noah paused. "I may have planned ahead." Ethan smiled because somehow that small confession felt important. They sat by Ethan's window, looking over the street below. The rain from earlier in the week had disappeared, leaving the neighborhood bright and calm. Noah asked about Ethan's drawings, and for once, Ethan did not feel embarrassed talking about something he loved. He showed Noah some of his recent work and waited for the usual polite reaction people gave when they did not really understand. Instead, Noah studied the drawings carefully. "You put a lot of emotion into these," Noah said. "That is rare." Ethan looked away, feeling a little overwhelmed by how easily Noah noticed things other people missed. Most people just see the characters. Noah smiled softly. "I think you are good at showing what people feel when they cannot say it themselves." For a moment, Ethan forgot how to respond, because Noah had somehow described him better than Ethan could describe himself. That evening, after Noah returned to his apartment, Ethan sat at his desk but could not focus on his work. His pencil rested untouched beside his sketchbook. He kept thinking about the conversation, the laughter, and the way Noah looked at him like he was someone worth paying attention to. Ethan knew he was getting closer to a feeling he had been trying not to name, and the most confusing part was that he did not want to stop it. The weeks that followed brought a strange new comfort into Ethan's life. He started noticing how much his days had changed without him realizing it. Mornings were no longer just about coffee and deadlines. Sometimes they began with a simple message from Noah asking if he wanted to walk downstairs together. Evenings were no longer completely quiet. Sometimes there was a conversation in the hallway that lasted much longer than either of them expected. Ethan told himself it was normal. Friends did these things. Neighbors talked. People shared moments. But there was a small voice in the back of his mind reminding him that not everyone made him smile just by hearing their footsteps outside the door. One Thursday evening, Ethan was working late on a new illustration when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Noah. "Are you awake?" Ethan smiled before he even answered. "Unfortunately, my deadline and I are currently fighting." A few seconds later, Noah replied, "That sounds serious. Should I send help?" Ethan looked at the screen, laughing quietly. "Can you defeat a stubborn drawing program and a lack of sleep?" Noah answered, "I can bring coffee. That is my strongest skill." 10 minutes later, Ethan heard the familiar knock. When he opened the door, Noah stood there holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the same calm expression that somehow always made Ethan feel better. "You really keep emergency coffee ready?" Ethan asked. Noah shrugged. "I have learned that you become a completely different person when you are tired." Ethan looked surprised. "Different how?" Noah smiled. "You become even more dramatic." Ethan placed a hand over his heart. "I am offended." "You are also smiling," Noah replied. Ethan immediately looked away because Noah was right. They sat together in Ethan's apartment while the city lights reflected against the window. For a while, neither of them talked about anything important. They discussed movies, favorite childhood memories, and the strange habits people develop when they live alone. It was easy. That was the part Ethan found most surprising. Being around Noah never felt like work. He did not feel like he needed to impress him or pretend to be someone else. He could simply be Ethan. At one point, Noah looked around the apartment and noticed the drawings covering the walls. "You know what I like about this place?" Noah asked. Ethan looked confused. "My questionable decorating choices." Noah laughed softly. "No, it feels like you. Every corner has something that tells a story." Ethan glanced around the room. He had spent years thinking his apartment was just a place filled with unfinished projects and random things he collected. But Noah saw something different. He saw meaning. "You notice a lot," Ethan said quietly. Noah looked at him for a moment. "Maybe I notice things that matter." The sentence was simple, but it stayed with Ethan long after Noah left. Later that night, Ethan stood by his window, looking toward the apartment next door. A warm light was visible through Noah's curtains. It was such an ordinary sight. Just another apartment. Just another person living nearby. Yet somehow, that small light had become something. Ethan looked for every day. He finally admitted the truth he had been avoiding. This was not just curiosity. This was not just friendship. Somewhere between shared coffee, hallway conversations, and quiet moments that no one else saw, Noah had become someone important. And Ethan had no idea if Noah felt the same way. The feeling Ethan had been trying to ignore became harder to hide with every passing day. He still told himself that nothing had changed. Noah was his neighbor. Noah was his friend. That was all. But his own thoughts seemed determined to disagree. Every morning, Ethan found himself listening for the sound of Noah leaving his apartment. Every evening, he wondered if he would see that familiar smile in the hallway. It was ridiculous, and Ethan knew it. He had lived alone for years without needing anyone to make his routine brighter. Yet now, one simple conversation with Noah could turn an ordinary day into something he wanted to remember. Then came the weekend when everything shifted. Ethan had planned to spend Saturday finishing a new illustration project. He had his coffee ready, his playlist running, and a full day of quiet ahead. At least, that was the plan. A knock interrupted him before he even finished his first page. When Ethan opened the door, he found Noah standing there with a small smile and a look that made Ethan immediately forget what he was going to say. "I have a question," Noah said. Ethan leaned against the door. "That sounds serious." Noah held up a small envelope. "I received 2 tickets for a local art exhibit. A client gave them to me, but I do not really know anyone here yet." Ethan looked at the tickets, then back at Noah. "Are you asking me to go with you?" Noah smiled slightly. "I was hoping you would say yes before I had to make the question more embarrassing." Ethan laughed. "You? Embarrassed? I thought you were the calm architect who always has everything planned." Noah shook his head. "Not everything." That answer caught Ethan off guard. There was something honest about it. Noah was always composed, always thoughtful, but moments like this showed Ethan that he was not as untouchable as he seemed. They spent the afternoon walking through the exhibit, talking about paintings, designs, and the stories behind each piece. Ethan noticed that Noah never rushed him. He listened carefully, even when Ethan started explaining tiny details that probably did not matter to anyone else. You really love what you do, Noah said as they stopped in front of a colorful display. Ethan smiled. Is it that obvious? Yes, Noah replied. But I think that is a good thing. Ethan looked at him, surprised by how easily those words affected him. He was used to people noticing his mistakes, his awkward moments, or the things he worried about. Noah noticed the things Ethan was proud of. Later, as they walked back toward the apartment building, the conversation became quieter. The comfortable kind of quiet. The kind where neither person felt the need to fill every second. When they reached their floor, Noah stopped outside his door. I had a good time today, he said. Ethan smiled. Me too. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was a small pause, almost impossible to explain. Then Noah gave a soft smile and went inside. Ethan entered his own apartment a few seconds later, closing the door behind him. He leaned against it and let out a quiet laugh. He finally understood what was happening. He was not just enjoying Noah's company. He was waiting for it. And that realization felt both exciting and terrifying. Because the closer Noah became, the more Ethan wondered if he was the only one falling. The days after the art exhibit felt different to Ethan, even though nothing had officially changed. Noah was still the same person who lived across the hallway. They still exchanged casual greetings, shared coffee, and talked about ordinary things. But now there was a new feeling beneath those moments. Something quiet. Something Ethan could not ignore anymore. He found himself remembering small details from their afternoon together. The way Noah smiled when he talked about his work. The way he looked genuinely interested when Ethan explained his drawings. The way being around him felt easy, like they had known each other much longer than a few weeks. Ethan was beginning to believe that maybe Noah felt something too. Then, one evening, a simple conversation changed everything. Ethan was returning home from the grocery store when he saw Noah standing near the entrance of the building. Noah was looking at his phone with a thoughtful expression. Long day? Ethan asked. Noah looked up and smiled. A little. I just got a message from my old office. Ethan noticed something shift in Noah's expression. The usual calm confidence was still there, but underneath it was hesitation. Is everything okay? Ethan asked. Noah paused for a moment before answering. They want me to come back. There is a position opening at my old company. Ethan smiled automatically. That is great, right? Noah looked toward the street. Maybe. The answer surprised Ethan. Maybe. Noah took a breath. I moved here because I needed a fresh start. My old life was comfortable, but it was not making me happy anymore. Ethan listened carefully. Noah rarely talked about himself this way. What changed? Ethan asked. Noah looked at him. I met people here who reminded me what I was missing. The words were simple, but Ethan felt his heart react before his mind could understand why. For a moment, he wondered if Noah was talking about him. But then doubt appeared. Maybe Ethan was just imagining things. Maybe Noah was simply being kind. They continued walking upstairs, but the conversation stayed with Ethan. Later that night, he sat at his desk staring at his unfinished artwork. Usually, drawing helped him understand his feelings. But this time, even his sketches felt unclear. He drew a person standing near a doorway, unsure whether to step closer or walk away. Ethan stared at the image and laughed softly at himself. That is a little too obvious, he whispered. The next morning, Noah seemed quieter than usual. He was still friendly, still warm, but there was a distance Ethan had not felt before. It was small enough that someone else would never notice. But Ethan noticed. He always noticed Noah, and that scared him more than anything. Because now Ethan understood something important. He was not just afraid of liking Noah. He was afraid of losing the connection they had built. That evening, Ethan stood outside his apartment for a few seconds, looking at Noah's closed door. For the first time since Noah moved in, the space between them felt bigger than a hallway. It felt like a question waiting for an answer. The silence between Ethan and Noah became something Ethan noticed every day. It was not an argument. Nothing had happened. There were no harsh words or uncomfortable moments. Somehow, that made it harder. Because when something was wrong, Ethan could fix it. But this was different. This was a distance he could feel without knowing where it came from. For the next few days, Ethan tried to convince himself that he was overthinking everything. Noah had a life outside their little corner of the apartment building. Of course he had other responsibilities. Of course he had decisions to make. Ethan was just a neighbor who happened to become a friend. That was all. But his heart did not seem interested in accepting that explanation. The hallway that once felt full of little conversations now felt unusually quiet. One evening, Ethan came home later than usual after finishing a project at a local coffee shop. As he stepped out of the elevator, he saw Noah standing near his apartment door. For a second, Ethan felt relieved. Then he noticed the expression on Noah's face. "Hey," Noah said softly. "Hey," Ethan replied. The simple exchange somehow felt more difficult than it should have. Noah looked down the hallway before speaking. "I wanted to tell you something." Ethan tried to smile. "That sounds serious." Noah gave a small laugh. "Maybe a little." They stood there, separated by only a few feet, but Ethan felt like he was waiting for something much farther away. "I think I might take the position back home," Noah said. Ethan felt the words before he fully understood them. "Oh." It was the only response he could find. Noah noticed. "It is not decided yet." Ethan nodded quickly. "No, I understand. It is a great opportunity." And it was. Ethan knew that. Noah deserved happiness. Noah deserved success. But knowing that did not stop the small ache that appeared in his chest. "I just do not want you to think I am leaving because of anything here," Noah continued. Ethan looked at him. "Why would I think that?" Noah hesitated. "Because this place became important to me." That sentence stayed between them. Ethan wanted to ask what he meant. He wanted to ask if he was part of that reason. But fear held him back. What if he misunderstood? What if he turned a beautiful friendship into something awkward? So Ethan did what he always did when he was afraid. He smiled and pretended he was fine. "You should do what makes you happy, Noah." Noah looked at him for a long moment. "You always say things like that." Ethan frowned slightly. "Like what?" "Like you care about everyone else more than yourself." Ethan did not know how to answer. Because Noah was right. That was exactly what he did. Later that night, Ethan sat by his window with his sketchbook open. The page remained empty for almost an hour. Usually, drawing helped him understand feelings he could not explain. But this time, he already understood. He was afraid. Not because Noah might leave the building. Not because his daily routine might change. He was afraid because Noah had become someone who mattered. Someone whose absence would leave a space that could not easily be filled. Across the hallway, a light turned on. Ethan looked toward it and quietly smiled. Even with uncertainty between them, one thing was clear. Noah had changed his life. And Ethan was no longer sure he wanted to go back to the way things were before. The uncertainty that had settled between Ethan and Noah finally reached a point where pretending became impossible. For days, Ethan tried to act normal. He worked on his illustrations, answered messages, and followed the same routine he had always known. But every quiet moment reminded him of the same thing. Noah might leave. The person who had slowly become part of his everyday life might soon become a memory. Ethan hated how much that thought affected him. He had always been someone who handled change well. At least, that was what he told himself. But this was different. This was not about a different coffee shop or a new schedule. This was about someone who had made an ordinary apartment building feel like home. One evening, Ethan returned earlier than usual and found Noah sitting on the steps near the entrance. The warm glow from the lobby lights surrounded him, and for a moment, Ethan simply stood there. "You look like you were thinking about something serious," Noah said. Ethan smiled slightly. "That obvious?" "A little." Ethan sat beside him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence they had always shared. But this time, it carried something heavier. "I have been thinking about the job offer," Noah finally said. Ethan looked at him. And Noah looked down at his hands. "I do not know if I want to go back anymore." Ethan blinked. "What changed?" Noah smiled faintly. "You did." The words made Ethan forget how to breathe for a second. Noah continued before Ethan could misunderstand. "When I moved here, I thought I needed a fresh start. I thought leaving everything behind would help me figure out what I wanted. But then I met people who made this place feel different." Ethan looked away, trying to hide how much those words meant. "Noah, I used to think a home was just a place," Noah said quietly. "A building, a room, an address. But I think I was wrong." Ethan looked back at him. "What do you think it is?" Noah smiled. "I think it is the people who make you want to come back." The answer was simple, honest. And it made Ethan realize that maybe he had not been the only one feeling this connection. "I thought you were leaving," Ethan admitted softly. Noah looked surprised. "Did you want me to stay?" Ethan opened his mouth, but hesitated. This was the moment he had been avoiding. The moment where he could no longer hide behind jokes or polite smiles. "Yes," he finally said. "I did." The honesty felt scary, but it also felt like a weight had been lifted. Noah looked at him with a warmth Ethan had never seen before. I was hoping you would say that. For a moment, the entire world seemed quieter. The traffic outside, the distant voices, the sounds of the city all faded into the background. There was only this small moment between two people who had started as strangers and somehow became important to each other. Noah laughed softly. You know, you are much easier to understand when you actually say what you feel. Ethan smiled. I am working on that. I noticed. They both laughed. And for the first time in days, the space between them did not feel uncertain. It felt like a beginning. The morning after Ethan finally admitted what he felt, everything looked the same, yet somehow everything had changed. The apartment building was still quiet. The old wooden floors still made the same sounds. The small coffee shop downstairs still opened at the same time every morning. But Ethan no longer felt like he was simply moving through his days. There was a new kind of happiness in the little moments. A message from Noah asking if he wanted coffee. A conversation that started in the hallway and somehow lasted 20 minutes. A simple smile that could completely change the mood of an ordinary afternoon. Neither of them rushed to define what they had. They did not need to. They were learning each other in the same way they always had, through small moments that slowly became something meaningful. A few weeks later, Noah made his final decision. He turned down the offer to move back and accepted a new position in the city instead. When Ethan heard the news, he tried to act calm. That is great, he said. I am happy for you. Noah smiled. You know you do not have to pretend you are not relieved. Ethan looked away. I was not pretending. Noah raised an eyebrow. Ethan sighed. Okay, maybe a little. They laughed together, and Ethan realized how much he loved moments like that. Not the dramatic ones. Not the perfect ones. The ordinary ones. The moments where they could simply be themselves. Over time, their lives began to blend naturally. Noah kept a few of his books at Ethan's apartment because he was always there anyway. Ethan started leaving extra coffee cups in his kitchen without thinking about it. Their friends noticed before they did. You two realize everyone already knows, right? Ethan's friend asked one afternoon. Ethan looked confused. Knows what? That you are basically inseparable. Ethan laughed. We are just spending time together. His friend smiled. Exactly. That night, Ethan thought about how strange life could be. Months ago, Noah had been a stranger carrying boxes into the apartment next door. Now he was the person Ethan wanted to tell about every small thing that happened during the day. The person he looked for in a crowded room. The person who made silence feel comfortable instead of lonely. One evening, Ethan and Noah stood on the shared balcony area of their apartment building, watching the city lights appear one by one. Do you ever think about how different things would be if you never moved here? Ethan asked. Noah smiled. Sometimes. What do you think? Noah looked at him. I think I would still be searching for something I did not know I needed. Ethan smiled softly. And now? Noah looked toward the city, then back at him. Now I think I found it. Ethan felt that familiar warmth he had noticed from the very beginning. The feeling that started with a simple introduction in a hallway. The feeling that grew through coffee, conversations, laughter, and countless ordinary days. What began as two people living close to each other became something much bigger. A reminder that sometimes the most unexpected connections happen in the most ordinary places. Sometimes the person who changes your life is not someone you were searching for. Sometimes they are simply the person who opens the door next door and gives you a reason to stay.